Well, as we begin our conversation today on no nonsense, we must note that police operations are underway in the nation's capital to try and break up the so-called Freedom Convoy that's been there for entering into its third week. And the issue, and I know there have been many discussed there, but the core issue was vaccine mandates. At the same time, we're seeing these mandates come down across the country. But there are many, many other questions we have about where we are on this file. Are we moving from pandemic to endemic? What is going on in other parts of the world that might influence our decisions here? So we are going back to our friend, Dr. Jason Kindrachuk, good Saskatchewan boy. He lives in Manitoba now. We'll forgive him for that. Assistant professor at the University of Manitoba Department of Medical Microbiology and Infectious Diseases and the Canada Research Chair in, I'm gonna try this one, Jason.
Sure.
Molecular pathogenesis of emerging and re-emerging viruses.
That's perfect.
Okay, I got it out. Anyway, shorthand, he's our virus guy when we want to talk about some of these issues. So let's start with that broader point about pandemic to endemic. I mean, first we had the epidemic, and that's when it's all going crazy. And then the pandemic is when it goes crazy everywhere simultaneously. Are we making that move yet into endemic?
No, I don't think we are. The trouble with this, when we look at what a pandemic is, and really go back to late January 2020, when WHO declared a public health emergency of international concern, we're still in that same state. We're seeing changes, which are not that surprising, right? If we look back over past influenza pandemics, we look back at smallpox, different regions of the world will have different temporal responses to what's going on. So yes, things are starting to progressively get better in many areas of the world. Certainly North America is skewing that way, but we're not necessarily seeing that transpire over the rest of the world. So where are we today? The virus is still out in the community. We don't necessarily know how much room we can give to Omicron before it flares back up. So how many restrictions can we back off? How close can we get back to 2019 before we see the scale start to tip in the wrong direction? But we have to appreciate that, listen, the virus continues to transmit. It continues to change and mutate. And we don't know what the next move is going to be. It's kind of like, listen, I grew up, I was born in 77, so I grew up through the 80s, watched a lot of the Friday the 13th series, right? So every year it was kind of, what is Jason going to do this year to come back from the dead? We're at about part 6 or part 7 right now with SARS-CoV-2. So let's not assume that the monster is gone. Let's assume that it is still there. And we have to be ready for whatever else it throws at us.
So are you then of the school that the loosening of restrictions that we're seeing right across the country, different timelines, but certainly in our home province, moving pretty rapidly, is it too soon or?
Such a tough question, right? And part of this is because we're at two different places. One is we need to be able to start to progressively move back to a sense of normal, right? What that necessarily looks like, I don't think we know, but I think we have to be able to start to see, okay, what can we do to get back to where we used to be? But we're not back to 2019. So I think that there's this aspect that, we have to be able to start to look at restrictions. We have to be able to loosen restrictions, but we have to do this in a very, very cautious fashion. So if we just throw everything open, we absolutely need to be sure that we're able to track where the virus is in the community. And given how quickly Omicron has spread, that puts us a little bit behind the 8 ball. So I'd rather see us take a cautious approach, but people are tired too. So
we've got even the health officials saying, look, we haven't seen the death rates do lag the decline in infections. So things are going to lift, and then people are going to hear the statistics saying, but we are still losing people every day, and then panic. And it seems like we've been in that cycle for 2 years now.
We have, right? And a big part of this is our behaviors, right? So listen, we can move back, we can certainly scale back restrictions. But a lot of this comes back to now our behaviors. How how comfortable are we going back to what we were doing in 2019? The whole idea, listen, I know that we've talked about hygiene theater a lot in certainly in scientific circles and in the media, in the public. How much are we going to continue to do things like, ensuring we're washing our hands and using proper hygiene? That keeps a lot of other bugs at bay, let alone worrying about SARS-CoV-2. How frequently are people going to use and adopt masks if they're symptomatic or they feel that they're maybe a little bit unwell? Those are our personal behaviors. And I think that's going to be a really big defining moment. It's certainly in the months ahead.
I think it's fair to say, and I think the jury's out on whether lockdowns work, and even to a certain extent on whether masks work. But what we do know is vaccines work in the sense of people getting less ill. I think Omicron might have been a slightly milder variant, but because people were vaccinated, we just did not see the ICU rates or the death rate hit the numbers that it had in an earlier time.
It was very different. Well, it was very different with Omicron, right? And I think part of this is, again, we saw a variant emerge that had a lower risk of severe disease attached to it, but also was able to infect a lot more people. So yes, we saw that some of that ICU burden dropped, but we still saw that impact on the healthcare system just in overall hospitalization. So we've had to really redefine how we view this. And of course, cases skyrocketed so fast that we couldn't actually keep up with surveillance in the community. So it really threw a curveball at us. And I think we're still trying to understand what this means moving forward. Certainly what Omicron is going to look like as we remove restrictions. And then again, what we need to do in regards to vaccinations. I think that there is this big question of saying, listen, 2 doses, still worked well in keeping people out of the hospital. But this aspect of being able to cut transmission, well, Omicron was able to get around some of those early defenses. So now we have to move to 3 doses. Well, what does that look like for people that are immunocompromised, and how long do those 3 doses, continue to provide protection? All these things we're learning in real time.
Because that's where I think the issue of mandates goes far beyond truckers on Parliament Hill. This is, when does mandatory 2 doses become mandatory 3, 4, and 5? I think there's going to be a real general resistance to that if it becomes enforced in any way.
I think you're very right on that, right? And I think one of the things with mandates also comes back to this idea of what we were doing certainly initially with border control in regards to new cases that were coming in, or being able to try to stop cases. In those early stages, made a lot of sense. The vaccine mandates certainly spurred people to get vaccinated. Maybe not so much in the sense that they were wanting to, right. But it gave a general push in the public. But at some point, you get to this question of saying, okay, we have how many, X number of people that are vaccinated, we have Y number of people that were infected. So our overall immune protection in our communities is this high. Do the enforcement of the mandates provide us with any additional protective measures and benefits? And I think that's going to be a real big question. I think when we talk about what is the purpose of this, trying to stop incursion of virus, well, if we already have Omicron everywhere, does it continue to make sense?
The other thing that I think is, and these are, thoughts not only in my head, but conversations with friends and relatives that are both younger and older, is that we're now starting to, because the research obviously was limited, and the intent was just get them out there and get these vaccines out there and try and save some lives. But I was just the other day in for a mammogram that has been postponed, obviously, for 2.5 years. And the techs, there were 2 of them, the women there said, look, we just a little warning. What we're discovering is that radiation triggers swelling of lymph nodes. You get the radiation from the mammogram, and it seems to be worse the most recent, according to how recent you've been vaccinated with the third shot. So this is something, and I read a fair amount about this. I'd never heard this, and I went, oh my God. And they said, well, we're trying to tell people because women are freaking out. They're going home and thinking that breast cancer is emerging. Like we hear with hearts and younger men. I mean, so many of these stories just starting to filter out.
Well, it is, right? And I think part of it is trying to provide context. And that's where, certainly from a science communication standpoint, we need to do a better job. I think we're trying to do that. Lymphadenopathy is something that we see in various vaccinations. Certainly, I got my smallpox vaccination for when I was working with different pox viruses. Lymphadenopathy is fairly common. You get massive swelling under your armpits in some cases, and it's uncomfortable and it's noticeable. I also live in a household where my better half, after her third dose, had quite a bit of lymphadenopathy as well. Now, part of this is because of what our immune system does, right? It's how our immune system behaves in response to certainly to anything foreign that is being introduced to us, whether that's a part of a virus or a whole virus. So this is an indication that, yes, our immune system is responding and it's going to be more robust in certain people. Certainly, there has been no concerns that have been linked back to lymphadenopathy. But I think the bigger thing is that we need to be able to get ahead on that messaging and inform people that, listen, this is something that you may experience. Here's what it's going to feel like or look like. Please don't panic. And here are the people to contact if you're concerned. Those are the things we need to continue to do. And I think we need to be able to present this to the public in a way that's digestible. We have science talk with how we speak in the lab and in conference rooms, but we need to be able to communicate better with the public where that understanding isn't there.
Back to the beginning, right? Don't wear masks because, in fact, we had a shortage of them, but they told the great unwashed public it was because they didn't work. As soon as we got supplies in, magically they started working. I mean, that's been my beef all along. Tell me everything that you possibly know about this and let me process that. Don't tell me it's all perfect and all wonderful, because I don't believe you and the evidence is to the contrary.
Well, one of the great ways to look at this is, and I was running some stats the other day. So if we look at the number of publications that are available on PubMed for COVID and SARS-CoV-2, just for the last 27 months, it averages out to about 6,000 papers a month. So that's about 200 papers every 30 days. That's the amount of new information that's coming out. It's amazing. It has far outweighed information we have on other viruses that we've spent decades working on. So that is what we're up against in terms of trying to process the information in real time. So there's going to be a time lag, but this is why certainly our understanding of this virus changes so rapidly, because this is how quickly information is coming in.
Now, one of the other things I read in the last few days, and I guess there's also been issues about the mRNA vaccines because it's new technology and people have kind of resisted that we have people like Vito in Saskatoon and Novavax. They're coming out with new vaccine options, but they're based on the old technology, which might also give people some peace of mind that they're not being experimented upon.
Yeah, it's a great question, right? Certainly the protein subunit vaccines, which are what people, at Vito have been working on, and certainly what Novavax has got their authorization and they're moving ahead on. The protein subunit vaccines have been around for a long time. The benefit is that you can get these moved out to different areas of the world without having to worry as much about cold chain storage. It's a little bit easier to move these around. And of course, you brought up the easiest question, which is, does it appease the people that have been concerned about the mRNA vaccines? Hopefully, I think we're going to find out. I think it's going to be a real question mark for the next few months as Novavax becomes available to the public. Do we start to see an uptick again in vaccinations? I hope that there is. I don't know as if this is going to be the thing that's going to bring that final 10% or 15% in to get them. But listen, at this point in time, any additional percentage of people that are getting vaccinated is going to help. And more importantly, our ability to get vaccines out to the rest of the world is unequivocally important at this point in time.
Yeah, that's a serious point. I want to come back to that in just a moment. But what seemed to be a huge incentive in the province of Quebec was limiting access to liquor stores, right? So it doesn't say much about us as a population that we have a point of principle until we can't get wine.
I think it's interesting, right? What have we learned coming out of this? There's a lot of, I think the social scientists are going to be able to help us with guiding how we do communication. But it's been a wild ride. At the end of the day, we're still in a pandemic. We need people to get vaccinated, and we have to figure out how to get that those final percentages coming in and rolling up their sleeves.
So will we ever get to, I mean, we're at roughly 80% of double vax people in Canada, right? So that seems like a substantive number to get. Even Theresa Tam says, you're not going to get that last 5 or 10% likely anyway. Is there such a thing as herd immunity?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think we're moving away from that idea that we're going to reach it. Listen, I think if we were dealing back in 2020 with the original virus, I think there was actually a belief we could get there. Then Alpha emerged, then we saw Delta, and then we saw Omicron. And that's not dismissing Beta and Gamma, but when we talk about variants that have overtaken the globe, we're in a very different place. So when you start to calculate out, okay, the number of people that are vaccinated, what immunity looks like, how immune waning plays into that, what groups can and can't be vaccinated or are willing to be vaccinated, we're in a tough spot. I think SARS-CoV-2 is not going anywhere anytime soon. So we have to figure out now how to come to a stalemate on a continual basis against this virus.
I saw 2 friends yesterday, both of whom have had COVID, and they've got a sense of freedom that other people, including myself, don't 100% feel, because what they're told by every medical professional and even border guards as they cross borders is, okay, you're good. You're fine for 6 months because that immunity is actually for real and we know it.
So this gets into such an interesting question, right? So there was some recent data that came out looking at, for Omicron, what does immunity look like against prior variants, whether you've been infected or you've been vaccinated plus infection? Well, when we look at Omicron infection alone, it provides good protection seemingly against Omicron, but against other variants, didn't hold up so well. So now we get in this question of saying, okay, listen, Omicron has overtaken pretty much every variant, but we don't know what's coming next. And that's where we get back to this thing of saying, listen, vaccination still appears to give us good broad protection against everything the virus has thrown at us. Even with people that are infected, yes, you have some amount of immunity, but let's bump that up because we literally do not know what is coming next after Omicron.
What can we actually, I was watching something on television, it was a rerun. So Jon Stewart, the comedian, and a liberal, certainly in American terms, when he actually said, look, this kind of bought into the Wuhan lab leak theory and said this out loud, his point being, we need to find out where the hell this thing came from so that we can, put all of the work that everybody's doing, including humans going to get vaccinated, so it can be put to some good purpose. We still don't have an answer to that.
No, I think we're coming up with certainly, I think, better indications of what this looks like. Now, all of this is on the back of, since SARS-CoV-2 did not just move from an animal into humans in a state of humans. Now it's moved from humans into a number of other species. And those are species that in many cases we've identified because of symptoms and I think because of circumstance, not necessarily because we've gone and done massive surveillance. So where are we now? Well, this virus is very promiscuous. It moves into different species, which complicates that question of where was the virus originally hiding in nature and where did it spill over into humans? What was that, those steps in between? Yeah. We don't necessarily know. That's going to require a lot of surveillance. And to be fair, when we talk about this and we talk about this idea of trying to figure out, reservoir species, listen, we've been doing this for 40 years for Ebola. We have a good idea of what the reservoir is. We still have not recovered infectious virus from an infected bat in the wild, because we're not dealing with every individual animal of a particular bat species that's infected at the same time. You're dealing with a tiny subset that likely are infectious. So when you're doing sampling or surveillance, you're looking for basically a microscopic needle in a massive mountain of a haystack, hoping that you're going to be able to find this. Now, I think we're doing better with how we're actually approaching this, and the pieces of the puzzle are starting to come together. But it's not going to be something that in the next couple of months we'll have a solution. This is going to probably take a few years.
Let's just pause it and agree, because nobody can prove it, that this was some, conspiracy on the part of the Chinese to infect the whole world and take over, the economy. Let's say it happened in that it was a lab leak and that people were working on this. So now the whole idea of gain of function research is a dirty word. You come from the scientist side of this. How do you push back and say, look, we need to do this?
It's a good question, right? We've seen this question come up a lot for influenza viruses. Listen, I think that there are certainly purposes for doing some of these types of investigations, in particular trying to understand how viruses work or how mutations may change the behavior of virus so we can anticipate what a virus is going to do next. Now, that isn't easy. Viruses randomly mutate, but if you have a sense of where mutations may start to change how virus behaves, well, that starts to tell you, okay, if we're doing surveillance, we can identify all these things. But there needs to be an unbelievable amount of oversight. Now, coming from a high containment lab background, there certainly when I was in the US, there was a ton of oversight in regards to dual purpose, gain of function, all this type of work was heavily researched and investigated in regards to what was being done in the lab, and could this have any consequences if we were ever to see viruses leak out of the lab. So we need that type of oversight. We need transparency, which I think is the biggest thing. Different labs across different regions of the world are going to be under different types of administration. So can we get transparency and agreements on a collaborative scientific basis that allows us greater understanding of what each individual country or each individual institution is doing?
Because that's the issue. Did Anthony Fauci and the companies that he supports, did they go to China, to the Wuhan lab, because there isn't the transparency and oversight, and they can't get it done in the US?
It's difficult, right? Again, certainly having looked at the differences between Canada and the US, we have certainly have different standards and different oversight committees. So having that greater, I think, collaborative sense to all of this will hopefully preclude some of these transparency issues as we move forward. Listen, I'm naive in that sense. I hope that people can kind of use this as a sense of optimism that we can move ahead and make things better. But frankly, we have to.
You mentioned, and then I went off on a little diversion there about the need to get vaccines into the developing world and all sorts of places where it's not yet. And it's hard to send the mRNA vaccines because, as you say, they need proper temperature control and transport control, et cetera. Can we solve this problem in the short term with these old style vaccines?
So I think it will help us. But we have to appreciate that a lot of this is not just about supply, right? So yes, listen, getting vaccines applied to different areas of the world is a big issue, but we also have to think about distribution, right? So you can drop off vaccines, but if you don't enable distribution or you don't enable the infrastructure to be able to allow for dispersal of those vaccines, then you haven't done anything, especially if you're dropping off vaccines that are close to expiry date. So we've been able to circumvent some of those issues. Places like the DRC have been doing great work with the Ebola vaccine and getting vaccine distributed. We need to empower those areas of the world to be able to work independently and to strengthen them. So rather than making them reliant on the rest of the world, make them independent, make them, give them the strength to be able to solve these issues. I think we're moving in that direction. Is it going to be solved in the next couple of months? No, probably not, because this preceded COVID by ages. But we have to make things better.
We've even got a lifespan issue, again, back to our, how many, is 2 it? Is 3 going to be it? Is 5 going to be it? As we discover that the effectiveness time is shrinking, like at the beginning, we were told if you get a vaccine, you're good. You're going to be good. Again, probably not information that was completely accurate. Let's put it that way. But it is now apparent that the effectiveness wanes.
The effectiveness does certainly wanes. And I think when we look at protection from severe disease and hospitalization, that's part of it. Then we have to look at the idea of protection from infection and ongoing transmission. So our biggest concern right now is, listen, ongoing transmission of this virus and high circulation allows the virus to continue to change. And that's where we get in this issue of variants of concern. So if we want to try and choke off the virus from being able to do that and being able to change, let's try and decrease the boundaries in which the virus is operating. And that gets back to the idea of saying, we have a large area of the world that has not gotten the same amount of vaccines as we have. Let's actually appreciate that equity is an issue, and it's in literally everybody's best interest to get this dealt with as quickly as possible.
Yeah, we live in a world where nothing is, it's only a plane ride away, right? So
absolutely.
Yeah, which it comes to. So the other thing that has come up recently are the companies like Pfizer pulling back themselves from asking for FDA approval for vaccinations for young kids, like 5 and under, that kind of stuff. Why are they doing that? What are they nervous about?
I think they want to be as cautious as possible, right? So we've certainly seen already, questions that have been raised in regards to vaccine uptake because of the issues that were linked to myocarditis, and especially those that were in younger males. There is this question when we look at kids that are 5 and under. Is the vaccine that they're getting actually beneficial? So does it provide them with an added benefit above and beyond just regular, non-pharmaceutical interventions that we're already using? That's the big question mark. And certainly as somebody who has a 3-year-old, I want to be assured that what I'm giving my child is not only safe, but it's effective. And I think that's a big question mark. Now, in saying all of this, we have somewhat of a reprieve because this virus does not necessarily focus on young children. It can cause severe disease, but it certainly is lesser so than what we see in other adults. So that gives us a little bit of benefit in not having to get vaccines dispensed as rapidly as possible, as we saw with older adults. But we have to appreciate that, again, we're also putting kids out into the front line of this virus. And certainly if you give the opportunity for the virus to infect kids, some percentage of those kids are going to end up requiring hospitalizations or potentially with severe disease.
Sorry, go ahead.
I was just going to say, so we get back to this thing of saying we need vaccines, we need them to be highly efficacious, but we need the data to demonstrate that they are efficacious.
Because I think this is full circle on the question of where we find ourselves today with protests and police actions and whatnot, which is, at what point do we say, look, let them get back to school? The impact of them not being there is dramatic. The number of people we all see dying of other illnesses because they're not being treated. People going just bloody stir crazy because they've been locked up for 2 years.
Absolutely.
We have to find a societal balance on this, not just a scientific balance on this.
Yeah, no, you're 100% correct. And that's difficult, right? Because we have to weigh all of those different aspects of, the social ramifications, the psychological ramifications, the economic ramifications, the public health ramifications, and make decisions as the virus continues to change. So Omicron does have high transmissibility. That has, it certainly has swept through, many daycares and areas through Winnipeg and the rest of Canada. Kids will probably have some amount of protection that have been infected, which is good. But we still need to be able to get kids vaccinated too. So I think, the next few months are going to be really pivotal for us to try and keep control of the virus as we put people back out more into a public sphere where the virus is still transmitting.
And see if we are building up some immunity in our own systems, separate and apart from getting a new vaccine every 3 months, that we're actually.
And can we control transmission? I mean, I think that, to me, that's going to be the biggest question is as we push people back into things, what are, again, the things that we can loosen up our restrictions on, and what are the things that we've changed that have allowed us to have some amount of virus transmission, but not so much that we're seeing a lot of people getting sick and putting stress on health.
You see little behavioral changes. I spent half my life on an airplane, and you always came, sat down, chatted with the person next to you, where are you headed off to, blah, blah, blah. And then everybody watched their movie or read their book and all of that. Like, people don't communicate anymore because you can't turn that closely to one another and have that conversation, mask on or not, right? It's like our social behaviors are really changing in nuanced ways.
They are. I think part of it, though, is, again, I think historically, certainly we need social scientists to look back and say 1918 to see what happened afterwards in regards to people's behaviors, I think that we are going to see actually some beneficial change of behaviors that may allow us to control other viruses. I hasten to say we've done a very good job at controlling influenza the last few years.
Yep.
What behaviors can we continue to adopt that allow us to keep control over those things that frankly did put a lot of people in the hospital that could have been controlled?
One of the troubling things, and then I'll let you go, but I read that tuberculosis, TB, is just, there's been an outbreak in northern Saskatchewan, 48 cases. It may be higher today, you know the numbers, 17 in kids. Again, we keep saying to ourselves, 2022, haven't we figured out how to deal with bad things that happen to people?
Yeah, it's a great question, right? So I always start talks that I give in seminars that I give with an overview of where we are in regards to in current emerging infectious diseases. We have to appreciate that while we're dealing with COVID, that has not stopped everything else from circulating. Right. And a lot of other diseases have frankly been able to take advantage of some of these situations. So
that's an interesting way to put it.
It is. And I think that is unfortunately the world we now live in. So now we have to figure out, okay, what are the things practically that we can do to control transmission on top of therapeutics? And that's going to be, I think, a very, very pivotal point.
Is that the other issue? And we didn't touch on it because there now are therapeutics, obviously, for the COVID in general. And that happened too pretty quickly in terms of the overall scheme of things. So are you feeling confident about that? Is that going to be the game changer, which is, okay, we're going to open up, and if you get sick, at least we can fix you?
Yeah, I hate saying game changer because there's no one tool that is going to completely alleviate what we've experienced with COVID. So the antivirals will help. It gives us something else for those people that have severe breakthrough infections or people that were unvaccinated that end up with symptomatic disease to be able to take. That will hopefully loosen or remove some of those overall healthcare burdens that we've seen and save some lives. It is an addition on top of everything else we have. So vaccination still precludes people from requiring that hospitalization in most cases. We need to get people vaccinated. The antivirals help, but so do all of the other practical things we're doing. So let's continue to add basically arrows into our quiver and fight back on this virus.
So what about you? Like, are you going to go to a restaurant? Or are you going to go sit with other parents in a stand and watch hockey or dance?
Yeah. I'm getting closer to that. Listen, we've got a great gym here at the university, so I'm working out there, but I'm wearing a KN95 still, right? So yeah, it's uncomfortable, but it's my move back to more normalcy. I think once spring and summer hit and we're more outdoors, that sense of comfortability is going to change. Right now, we're still locked inside, frankly, because prairie Canadian weather. So
400 below,
absolutely. So it's a tough time to try and see people. I think really feel inclined to just spending a lot of time indoors because we know what can happen.
Yeah. So good of you to let us think out loud and ask all the questions that are, spinning around in our heads and have somebody smart answer them. Thanks.
It's always a pleasure. Thank you.
Jason Kindrachuk, we call him the virus guy, but he has really, really impressive titles. Professor at the University of Manitoba's Department of Medical Microbiology and Infectious Diseases and the Canadian Research Chair in Molecular Pathogenesis of Emerging and Reemerging Viruses. I just have to say it because it's such a mouthful. It's crazy. Anyway, we'll see you soon. Thanks so much, Jason.
Thank you.
All right, that's it. That's it for this edition of No Nonsense with Pamela Wallen. We'll talk soon.